Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela Saioni, and welcome to Visualizing the Edit for Script Supervisors. This is a deeper dive into something that newer script supervisors especially will panic about possibly. It really depends where you're coming at script supervision from. There's many ways to, and listen, I have been teaching the subject, the script supervision in general, and teaching directing and visual storytelling and all of that since 1995. So I have seen people thrive in their careers coming at it from different perspectives, completely different perspectives. Editors, writers, actors. We have a lot of actors in my program. Production office staff. I've had stills photographers, stunt people. There's so many ways into the profession that editing might not be a thing that you grasp at the beginning. Obviously, by the time we get deeper into our craft, to be an in-demand script supervisor, we really have to understand editing. We have to be able to support the director in their visual storytelling through our understanding of editing. And so today's focus is going to be the answer to the question I get often, which is, what if there's a shot list or there's no shot list or a storyboard? How will I know? How will I be able to visualize the edit in order to do my job and help the director better? So we'll take a dive into that. Before I start, for those who don't know me, I have been script supervising since 1991, and I have been and I've done that in 10 different countries, though I am based in Canada and usually work on big American blockbuster shows. I've worked from $0 to $200 million in terms of budget levels. My favorite zone to work in, because I'm a comedy script supervisor, is like the $30 to $100 million feature. That's a really fun spot for me to live. But I have done bigger things and I have done smaller things, and I wish the same for all of you. I've got alumni, of course, who've done incredible things with their careers, both as script supervisors and directors. I also teach screenwriters, but that's a whole separate arm of what I do because I am also a screenwriter and a story editor. And yeah, we'll talk about my program at the very end, but I do have a very extensive program that describes and trains you in script supervision from all different angles, not only, but also especially the visual storytelling, how to become a valued member of the director's team so that they keep on hiring you. I will almost always get hired directly by the director or by the showrunner who knows the value I brought to their process. And that's what I try to instill in all my students. And I'm still happy, even if you're not my student or you're never going to be my student, still happy to spread the information, because the more that the world at large, because some of you might be here and you're not even script supervisors, the more the world at large understands what we do, the more respect we'll get in our profession, the more people there's a whole political side to it's all on my YouTube channel about why I do what I do. I think education is very important, educating producers and directors and other crew members about how we can be of maximum value to them as creatives and to the production, so that they understand things like why we need prep time, why we need wrap time, etc. But this today is all about on set. Well, mostly I will talk about how to resolve this in prep. So visualizing the edit was one of my superpowers when I started. Put a 1 in the chat if you have ever edited or worked in post-production. That's not going to be most people, but if it is, you already have a superpower because that is something you'll quickly learn. There you go, Laura. Oh yeah, Laura and Simone. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Olga. Yeah, great. You already have a superpower in this role. Assuming you want to someday do this role or that you already do this role, it's a hugely important skill to develop. But fear not, if it's not something you possess already, every single aspect of our job is learnable. And I know this because I've trained hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Animator, yeah, animation yeah. So most of the editing theory will also apply to animation. In animation, a lot of things are much more planned out and sketched out than they are in live action. We'll talk about that later, but yeah, it certainly will give you a visual eye. Absolutely. So this is really about how to prioritize our workflow on set, because there's so many things that fall under our role on set, and it can be overwhelming, especially if it's your first time, or if it's your first, like I say my program is for people in their first 10 years, because there's so many things that we encounter in those first 10 years that we need to get over and work past and work through in order to have like an A-list career in within or after those 10 years. So this is I think the first thing that if you don't already have the ability to visualize the edit, it's probably the first thing that you want to work on. You want to get literate in visual storytelling, which is like how directors and cinematographers design the shots they're going to use to tell the story visually. You're going to need to understand storytelling from the writer's perspective as well. And I'll explain at the end how that's all going to tie into this discussion. You need to understand performance, and you need to understand, most of all, editing theory, right? Because I describe our job very differently now, but I used to say in the beginning, because it is so true, we are the editor's representative on set. So to do them justice, our role when we were first, when the position of script supervisor first came to be in the 1910s, 1917 is the first script supervisor. Even before sound, even before there was sound, there was us. And the reason it was originally to save the production money, and time, to save reshoots, to save hacky looking edits, things that just don't look professional on screen, and to save time in post-production. Time on set is so expensive. Time in post is the second most expensive. And if there are any producers watching this, time in prep is the cheapest. So you probably want to have your script supervisor on board early enough in prep that they can help troubleshoot things that could, impact you on set and in post, because it's the cheapest time to solve problems, like by far, by far. And sometimes when producers are newer, they don't see that big picture, and they don't even understand how we can certainly help. But that's the reason our role was created in the first place, to save producers time and money, believe it or not. So when I say this is about prioritizing your workflow on set, so our workflow on set includes so many things. I know some people, like looking at from the outside, think that we just take notes all day. I mean, because that is a big part of our day, is taking notes and preparing notes to send to post-production. But that's just a fraction of everything in our workflow, right? Our minds are constantly, one of the things we're constantly doing all day is anticipating problems at every stage of production. But on set, we're very specifically anticipating any editing issues, having the director's back on anything that might trip them up in post-production. We ask ourselves a lot of questions like, is the story being told? Is this going to cut together? Is this going to flow from scene to scene? But our workflow on set, we're often asking, that's one of the bigger questions we're asking ourselves. There's so many questions we're asking ourselves. Listen, let's face it, but we can't watch 100% of everything, because we're not machines, we're human beings. And there's also so much time in a day, and there's just, it's a finite amount of time to get a specific number of scenes done. So we can't also, even if we saw 100% of everything, right, in terms of the continuity, in terms of something that will affect the edit or the visual storytelling, we can't address everything. If we try to address all those things, we will never work again, right? We have to understand what is a priority, what is going to be of utmost importance to the director and the producer by the time they get into post-production. And, we're not in North America and most of the world. There's only a couple of countries in the world where they actually bring us in post. The only ones I've heard of so far are the Czech Republic and Nigeria. Is it still called the Czech Republic? Sorry, I'm very old. I'm very old. But yes, those are the two countries where we actually are brought into post-production. And what you're going to see is what I recommend to my students is something that I used to do when I was just starting out in the business, even though I came from an editing background. When you're starting out and you're doing those really low budget things, it can be like a quid pro quo kind of thing where you can say, okay, I'll work on that low budget, assuming all the keys are getting the same rate, because sometimes people don't understand we're keys, but as long as we're all getting the same key rate, even if it's terrible, what I would like to do in exchange for that is come into the editing room at least one day and sit with the editor, either just to watch or to ask questions. And you wouldn't believe how many editors were so down with that. And in the first sort of 5 years of my career, that's the word. I would do that so often that that was sort of the early part, the early draft of this course was in 1995. That was the first time I taught, not this course, but my director whisper training program in its first incarnation was based on everything those editors told me and all the questions that directors asked of me. And then it just grew and grew and grew as my experience grew. But prioritizing your workflow, if you know how to do that really early on in your career, you're going to work. You're going to be in demand. Assuming people even know what we do, that's another story altogether. Sometimes if people just see us as note takers, they might not involve us in coverage discussions. But as you get deeper into the profession, you're going to work with professional directors who know that you're involved in those discussions, and they're going to ask you almost every day, possibly almost every scene, am I covered? At some point, they're going to turn to you and say, am I covered? Type a 1 in the chat if, I know you guys are at all different levels in this class, but type a 1 in the chat if you've ever heard a director say that to you. All day, every day, right? For the new people who've never been on set, just expect that question. And what they mean is, do I have all the shots I need to tell the story visually in a way that will cut together smoothly? That's what they're asking you, and you're there to vet that for them. Some directors will not move on until you answer that question for them. They will not move on to the next scene. Some of them will, and then you got to tap them on the shoulder and go, oh, there's potentially a big issue. But you got to know, you got to have enough understanding of how you can cut around stuff, or what is at least the bare minimum to cut a scene together smoothly, to be confident in your answer, like, yeah, we can move on. So we do try to correct what is most important in the time allotted. So how do we see that? So there's a way of seeing, I used to call this in the early draft of my Director Whisperer course, seeing like a continuity person. Seeing like a script supervisor is a different way of seeing. Because we have to prioritize, because we have to understand all kinds of things relating to editing theory and framing and pacing and storytelling, there's a way that we start to see the material as we're shooting it. Okay. So one of the things, I just want to get some basic concepts down. A lot of you may know this, but some of you may not yet. Especially when people say, I saw a comment recently in the public script supervision group where someone was saying that she was not provided with a shot list. And she said, well, I was not provided with a shot list. And that was, how can I do my job? I want you guys to know that only 30% of directors ever give me a shot list. Fewer directors than that do storyboards. So we have to learn to do this job without a shot list. It's just the reality. It doesn't give anyone permission to not include you in the coverage discussion. In fact, if there is a no shot list, they better include you in the coverage discussion even more so. So that person, it sounded like, was treated pretty badly. Just because she asked for a shot list, which is not cool, obviously, but I don't want people to expect, because like you might have gone to film school, or you might have taken a film course where directors prepared shot lists. Unfortunately, that's not how most directors work, and we just all have to adapt to that as a crew, right? And I'm not even saying that directors who don't provide a shot list are terrible. I've never seen a shot list from Paul Feig. He is one of my favorite directors I've ever worked with. He is super, super flexible. I have some other favorite directors. There's a guy named Kevin Bray who did a lot of our episodes of Suits. He's phenomenal. Never saw a shot list out of him in years. I did 4 seasons of that show. Yeah, there's a lot of really talented. It's not about their talent. It's about adapting to their process. And whatever their process is, we still very much need to be able to edit in our heads as the film or television series is is being made in order to help them to answer questions, to know that we've got it at least on a technical level. Whether we've got it on a creative level is a question that is above our pay grade, but we will sometimes be asked that if a director really trusts us. Especially in television where we know the show more than maybe even the director does because we're there every single day. And in television, the directors are the guests. They might rely on our answer even on a creative level. And that is only when they invite you into that conversation, but you still need to have enough confidence in what you know about all the different aspects I'm going to be talking about today to help them. So there are in the Director Whisperer training program, I tell my students there are 4 major questions that we ask ourselves every time, and there are things that I came up with over the years, but the one we're going to focus on today is, what are the cutting points within the scene? That is such an important question to ask yourself, even if there is a shot list, because even if you have a shot list, you may or may not be able to understand what the actual cutting points are potentially going to be. I want you guys to know that most of the time, editors are trying to hide an edit. They're trying to disguise an edit. And the reason for that is, and that's not 100% true, because sometimes the director would like to call the audience's attention to the edit for emotional reasons, for dramatic reasons. But most of the time, like 98% of the time, we are trying to hide the edit. And that's so that the audience can experience the movie as if it's like a real thing unfolding before their eyes, real life story, so they get into it. I know that myself, when I watch movies and I'm really, really into it, I miss 100% of like the continuity. I'm talking about an edited movie in the cinema, not on set. A thing we hate is when directors say, when you point something out that you feel is important, and a director says, "Ugh, if they're watching that, we're not doing our jobs." I mean, they're kind of right in the sense that they're I don't know if this actually, I should look up if this still exists. In the 90s, because I'm from well before the 90s, because I was born in the 60s. There used to be a website called nitpickers.com. And nitpickers.com would point out continuity errors in major motion picture, anything that people noticed. And some of our favorite movies, and some of the biggest movies in Hollywood, had hundreds and hundreds of errors that got cut into the movie. So it's not like everyone's expecting you to be perfect. I always start out telling my students that you're not expected to be perfect. So don't be scared of having to have all the answers all the time, but having a grasp of what is important in visualizing the edit, especially, and this is one of the biggest questions, what are the cutting points within the scene going to be? You're not waiting for a director to tell you that. So they might not know or be able to anticipate where the cutting points are in comparison to me. Okay. And that's not I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that that's a reality that many of you will face. Put a 1 in the chat if you've faced that reality already. I bet there's a bunch of you. And a lot of you are not even like super veterans either, and where you actually walk on set being the person who knows most about the edit, which is fair. That is why we're hired to a large extent, right? For our knowledge. We're hired for many different reasons, but our knowledge, our ability to support on a technical level, and of not trying to stop production to fix every single thing, but of having the understanding of knowing what is most important to fix. So back to my point about hiding the edit, if you know that most of the time we're trying to hide the edit, you guys probably already know, you may know it intuitively. You'll know it from watching movies over and over again. If editing theory and editing is not something that you're so strong on yet, I would say watch films you love and television shows you love, and watch where the editor cuts from different shot sizes or different shots. And then start to ask yourself, oh, I wonder why they did it there. Well, you're going to notice that over 90% of the time, they're cutting on a major move, whether it's a physical movement or a camera movement, like a camera move, hopefully to another camera move. It's harder to cut from a camera move to a static shot, but you can hide an edit in a major movement. So that's a big clue to let you know kind of, okay, what am I honing in on? So what I like to do, most of the time, and not all of the time, but most of the time, you'll get some sort of rehearsal, and you'll usually get to go to private blocking as the script supervisor. So private blocking is when the director takes the script supervisor, the DOP, and the actors aside, and the actors work through the physicality of the scene for the very first time on set. I mean, if you're extremely lucky, we'll get to be in rehearsals and do that, but a lot of movies don't even rehearse anymore because of actor availability. But at least we'll be doing it on set for like anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. It really depends on how complicated the scene is, but you should be in that private blocking. And if people are not inviting you to private blocking, you got to sort of raise your hand and go, oh, I think I need to be there. They think we need to be there to call lines, but what the reason we need to be there is to start to see the shape of the scene on a physical level, right? And the reason, and yes, we can also call lines. So there's a way we track the continuity on set. But when I track the continuity for those blocking rehearsals, I do it with a pencil because they're going to change. It's going to change, right? It'll even change on set. That's why we do different takes and different colors. And there's all kinds of ways we do it so that we can see the difference from take to take. But in those private blockings, I'm writing in pencil. There's a whole annotation that we, it's whatever works for you to read to keep a record of the blocking faster. There's a specific way that I teach my students that has worked for me, but there's no right or wrong as long as it's fast, as long as you can communicate to yourself quickly what all the major moves in the scene were. And yes, that's exactly what I'm tracking. When did they move? Like what word did they move? How did they move? If they're waving their arms around, I'm drawing stick figures of, oh, this is when you raised your hand to wave. This is the direction you turned, right? A turn is a major move. Big arm action is a major move. When they stood, when they sat, these are major moves. These are cutting points, potentially, because we don't know. The director might not have shots that cover every single major move, and they might not have to. That's where script analysis comes in. That's where our knowledge of the subtext of a scene and what the director wants to achieve dramatically with the scene, that's where that knowledge comes in. But on a basic technical editing level, I'm so dialed in to the moves, I start to see like the shape of a scene. I start to see the cutting points. I see the scene in terms of the cutting points, because being able to understand that, I'll be able to have answers to 90% of questions or more. It's for us, it's all about where the potential cutting points are, but it's not only about that, because there's also, they might not match which hand they tap the cigarette with, but is that a cutting point? It depends. The answer is it depends. Know that they're going to want to hide the edit in post-production, because to make it feel like a fluid scene, usually, unless the director says, we want jump cuts, we want messy, we want discontinuity, which, believe it or not, some directors, but they need to go in telling their crew that, so that we're not interrupting them, or we're saying, oh yeah, there's a lot of discontinuity that you can cut there. If you want to go further, I can even tell you like what you can have the actors do, but yeah, go to town. But most of the time, that's not what they're going for. So we start to see like the shape of a scene that will start to serve you really well. How many of you feel like I bet you're here because you feel like that's somewhat of a challenge for you, right? Often the fix is just cutting more. We have so much more access to tools that we can cut on our iPhone, even simple Instagram reels. Listen, I like to do ridiculously stupid Instagram reels just to keep cutting, just to keep seeing, like, I'll just shoot anything. If you guys know my channel, sometimes I'll put like a really bombastic piece of music over random footage just to see how it will cut together and create something that looks more epic than it was just me walking around town having a day, right? So I'll try moving the camera and then cutting stuff on my phone. But like, listen, I learned all this in early days. I thought I wanted to be an editor at first. You guys probably know my story. I realized I was more of an extrovert and I needed to be on set. So I didn't know what script supervision was. And someone said, oh, your editing knowledge is going to, they were right, because I could see when the director asks you stuff like what side of camera should they enter from. So that's like the next level is like understanding eye lines and axis. Of course, I go deep into that. I have a master class that maybe some of you took called Axis Schmaxis, just about that. But that's sort of like once you start to see the cutting points and know what to prioritize, you also want to start to see the axis of action. and not be the police of it, but help the director use it as a tool. We won't really get into that today because that's a 3-hour masterclass that I teach, and it's even longer than that in the program. But that is something that you need to be aware of. If you don't understand how things cut together on an eye line and axis level, then that is something that you got to work on, and it's all learnable. So once you start to hone in on what the cutting points are, and you're going to know by the marks you make on your page, you're going to start to see, when the actor says to you, in the rehearsal, like, which way did I turn, or in take one, which way we're going to be honing in on that. Hopefully they know why that's important. If they don't know why that's important, and you're doing take one, and there's a whole kind of shape to the scene and then it completely changes in take two, we track it. I personally track it in a different color, and I teach my students to track it in a different color so we can see, oh, he stood up there, he stood up on this line in take one, and then in take two he stood up on this line. That's probably going to be a cutting point. So which one do you prefer? And the director may or may not have an answer, and sometimes they'll say, oh, whatever, as long as I'll leave it up to the editor. Okay, fine. But then when we go to cut into, there's probably going to be some piece of coverage where they stand up into their close-up, and they're going to turn to you and say, where should that shot start? Where in the dialogue? And it's like, well, it depends. Are we cutting in from take one or take two? And this is where our understanding of what is a good performance comes in, because sometimes we're making these judgment calls, and we can only do it one way. We only have time to cover it once or twice, but we don't really have time to cover every option. So we have to understand what the best performance take was if the director doesn't understand it. Now there's great directors who understand all of this, and sometimes it's just a matter of, but they're not tracking the continuity, they're tracking the performance. So it's a matter of communicating which take did you like the best, because there's different continuity, and then they'll say, oh, match to that last one was amazing, and we've got to know what the continuity of the stand-up timing was, and all of that. And that's what we'll aim to work with the actor to match. And there's a whole other talk I did, which some of you were at, called sorry, what did I call that one? Oh, actor whispering. Just how we do that, how we work with the actors on that, because they'll have all different experiences of our role in relation to their role. So a very important thing to what I've just sort of described was, I want to get into overlapping action. What is overlapping action? So coverage, yes, sometimes the director will do the whole scene in one shot. Good luck with that, because it's really hard to get to tell the whole story in one shot. They might have done it, but then they might have killed their pace. I don't know. It depends. Like I've worked with directors who are great at oneers. That's what we call oneers. But most of the time there will be coverage. There will be multiple shots that will cut together to tell the story. So overlapping action is basically what part of the movement is repeated, to give the editor maximum flexibility of choosing the cutting point, right? So what I mean by that is, if the master is me, I want to get up and move, but I'm like, I've got all these lights. So pretend I'm, okay, I'll try to move. Hold on. I'll try to move in and out of frame. And I think the screen direction is flipped for you guys, but for me, I enter frame, I sit down, and I go, oh, hey, how's it going? Oh my God, you should see the day I just had. It was super crazy. I'm like, oh, would you look at the time? Okay, I gotta go. Bye. And then I leave, right? So let's pretend that was a wide shot and that was the whole master. And then the director's like, great, and pretend so it was wider. Then the director says, okay, we got to do Daniela's close-up. Okay, cool. Script supervisor, where should she start? What was the first thing she said? Where in the dialogue should she? And I think I didn't speak on entry till I sat. I didn't, I stupidly didn't pre-plan it. I just sort of did it. But I said goodbye standing up. I know that for sure. Okay. So to overlap the action, when they do, the director's like, okay, now we're going to do the close-up. We don't start with the character just sitting down, right? Because there's a master that's all fluid. It's got all this motion. And then there would be a cut to a close-up. That's jarring because there's not a fluidity of movement to cut into and hide the edit. So that's about knowing how far back into the action to start the movement, start the shot. And so obviously, I think it's obvious, but if it's not, we would have the actress Daniela enter frame. In my case, it's left to right. I think on your screen it would be right to left, but enter frame in their close-up. So in the wide, we won't see the same framing as the wide, but in their close-up, we'll have them enter frame and sit. So the editor can cut in at any point in that movement and then have them stand out of frame for by. Now, sometimes the director will say, you know what, I want to get by on camera in the close-up. And it's not necessarily what they did in the master. In this case, it's not what they did in the master. As long as you have an option where that is the case, then you're covered. You have a version that the editor or the director might say, I definitely want to be on the close-up when she says bye. So I know in the wide shot she stood up and said bye, but I'm going to have her do it and that's fine. And just make a note for the editor that is what the director wanted. But otherwise, we're watching for like, when did she stand? When did she sit? And we're overlapping a fluidity of movement. So if you're working with a director and they're not overlapping enough action, and that was a basic example. Listen, there's so many moves you could include, like a turn, you know, which way do they turn into it, stand up into it, sit down into it. These are things that are going to start to hopefully become second nature, and you can start to visualize. Okay, you can start to see the edit sort of unfold, right? So that doesn't matter if there's a shot list or not. You know, when the director, if there isn't a shot list and the director says, can you think of any shots, IO? Can you think of any? And you think about the cutting points within the scene, and it's sort of a combination of also knowing what the director wants to achieve with that scene, because every scene has a very specific function in the storytelling. So my example from my big fat Greek wedding is in the meet cute, we covered everything. We got shots on everything. Every major cutting point was like, we shot the whole day on that meet cute. You know, when he comes into the coffee shop, I worked on the original Greek wedding, so I'm very old. So when the director said, am I covered? I'm like, oh yeah, every single line's on camera. Like, that's when I was what, 6 years into my career, 8 years into my career. I should have known better, but I didn't know better. That's not what am I covered means. Am I covered means, have I got the shots to tell the story I want to tell? So we've got all the shots. That's not the same as being covered. You could be covered in one shot. You could be covered in two. You could be covered in like 30. Like we had 30 in that scene. But did you tell the story of, like, it's not really covered unless you've told the story of the scene, unless the scene has fulfilled its function in the storytelling. So the problem in that movie, in that scene, which they fixed in post in a different way, they came back to reshoot to sort of fix the meet cute, was that we didn't get the sense from the character of Ian, John Corbett's character, that he was in love with her, that he even like marginally was even attracted to her. We got the sense on her side that she was way into him, but on his, we never got any any looks in close up from him where we start to see the couple falling in love. It is a meet cute after all, right? It's not a one-sided romance. So they solved it in post by adding, writing extra scenes, because we were going to come back and just shoot those close-ups, pick those up in post. I think that was the editor's actual request. And it was after discussion with the actors, it became those other dates that they went on. So it was sort of a slower build. So that was when I learned a huge lesson about coverage, and it's sort of impacted the way that I train directors and script supervisors to think about visualizing the edit, because it is technical, yes, but when a director asks us that question, it's a bigger question. And they may or may not, I might have been overstepping my bounds to say, but with a director I've never worked with or I've worked with once, I'd probably be shy to say, well, he's not into her. That's a performance thing that I would probably not comment on unless very much invited. But what I could have said was, do we need a close, always phrases in the form of a question. Do you think we need a close up on him looking at her the way she's looking at him? Again, on the line of like, but it'll make the director think. And sometimes when a director asks me the question, am I covered? I will, and if I don't know for sure the subtext, which by the way, if you do enough prep with a director and all that, you'll have a really clear sense. You don't have to stop and ask them this question, but sometimes you have to stop and ask them, that depends. What is this scene about for you? And like, you might actually know the answer, but they've never, them articulating it out loud for themselves will make them see things, make them see what you see without you having to say, hey, I think you need more coverage. Because I'll say it depends. What is this scene about for you? If they said this is a scene about two people falling in love, then there would be more coverage needed there. If they said this is a scene about this guy feeling intimidated, did we get it across in the shots, in the framing, in the coverage, in the edits? So that's what I mean about director whispering. I know people think the name of my course is potentially ridiculous, but I am always whispering in the director's ear. Often, we are, especially if the director trusts us enough to talk these things through with us, which I hope for all of you that you all experience many working relationships like that with directors. But so you can just turn the question back on them. It depends. What is the scene about for you? And if they can articulate it really quickly, and listen, if they can't, because you might misunderstand the subtext of the scene. That's happened. Don Cheadle calls me professor. When he works with me, we'll go through coverage all the time. As a director, I mean, not as an actor. Although I have worked with him as an actor. He calls me professor because he invites these discussions about, well, what is the point of the scene and how, what shot would say that best? And then he comes up with these incredible, incredible solutions to that. I don't come up with them, he does, but just having that, taking that 1 to 2 minutes of talking through subtext and what the scene needs to achieve and all that, it just he's one of the directors where it lights him on fire. Like he's like, yes, yes. And he does like wonderful visual stuff. Another director who I'm trying to think if he's ever handed me a shot list. I don't think he has. I don't think he has. Okay, so overlapping action, very important to know, to understand that concept, because that's going to be the way that you hide the edit through movement, right? All ships must enter and exit frame is a good that was a sign that Lucas had on in the miniature unit on Star Wars. I do that all the time. Star Wars. The miniature unit on Star Wars. All ships must enter. And that was to tell the second or third unit DOP who was on miniature unit to not just shoot the ship in frame. That's not good enough. There to give maximum flexibility for the edit, and maximum flexibility for the edit is what we're talking about here. Trying to give the editor the most choices in the time allotted that still reflects the director's vision. Okay, you can't shoot everything, you can't cover everything. Some people do, they try, it's a mess, right? The whole movie could be taken away from them, which is it's the flip side of when I teach. Am I Covered is the first half of my director whisper course, but directors take that just on its own. Am I Covered? Because the flip side of that is the director can craft their vision through the shots, and through their understanding of script analysis. They can craft it so they still have control over it, even though, because one way to lose control of your movie and to lose control of your voice is to just cover everything. That's not necessarily coverage, right? That's not necessarily telling the story you want to tell. But all ships must enter and exit frame allows the director or the editor in post to choose where they're going to do a match cut and get to know editing theory, watch movies and see that a match cut is simply one of the most famous examples is from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the ape or gorilla throws the bone in the air, and then there's a match cut to a satellite in outer space. So we know that thousands of years have passed through this very famous match cut, and it's like, this is the journey of mankind into the modern age. Yes, it is a transition technically, because it goes from one location, so one scene to another scene, but it's physically a match cut and the definition of that is they're cutting into something that's in the same part of frame, right? So it just matches so that you've got the audience's eye going to here, and then you cut to something that's here. So their eye is already there, and then it's a great transition to the other scene. Yes, so it is a transition, but it's like on a editing theory level, it is a match cut. Yes. And having, maximum fluidity of the move allows for that. It's one of the ways that shots will start to flow together. I did talk about how your understanding of script analysis plays a role. That is, I do touch on script analysis in Am I Covered, but not to the depth that I really want to. I train in script analysis with John Strasberg as an actor, but directors train with him for the same content. It's really, really, really vital to becoming a good a director, visual storyteller, filmmaker in general, and we have to support all that. That's why I always encourage my director whisperers to not only take what they learn in the program, which is, I know it's a lot, but it's also to really go deeper into editing, training in editing, in performance, which might sound crazy, but it's so tied to our job, and writing, screenwriting. The subtext, understanding subtext and storytelling, so important because it'll help us gauge what is most important. It'll help us, before we're about to interrupt or say, hey, we need to go again for this continuity thing, if we can visualize the edit. Oh yeah, and let me talk about that. Because that's a thing, that's a reality of our job, is that some actors will be better at continuity than others. Some will have insane amounts of mismatches, and we're like, can we even cut this scene together? Like, he's doing something different in every take. Will this even cut together? So you need to see that there's enough. Dylan McDermott said to me, "You're the glue. You're the glue. You understand how it cut." He was using that weird fake accent, but I was like, "I'm the glue." It's like, yeah, we have to understand if there's enough for the shots to cut together. So if they're standing up into some coverage and we have no other takes where they stand up into that, that's a potentially big problem, right? If that's going to be the cutting point. Otherwise, the editor is forced to cut in when they're already standing, and it's going to be potentially jarring, potentially not perfectly matched, all of that. So you can hide a lot of sins on moves, right? So we have to know what's important to bring up and not bring up. And really a lot of it is tied to those cutting. There might be, and listen, there's not usually, I mean, I did my Big Fat Greek Wedding when we had 12 characters in so many scenes, and I had to know what was important to prioritize, right? In terms of the technicality of the cutting. But most of the time, you don't have that many characters in a scene, and even if you do, there might only be certain aspects of the scene that are important on a storytelling level. So it's not like the editor is going to cut to everybody for every single line. They might, but hey, if you have that much coverage, you're probably going to be fine. But what's most important? So when we talk about coverage in a dinner table scene in my program, we start to break down, well, what is most important? Yes, there's 10 people at this table, but do we need to hear from all 10 of them? If it was Soul Food, the series, which I worked on for 4 years, it was important to hear from everyone at the table because that was always our act 5. The family is sitting down at dinner and we're resolving all their storylines at dinner. I get it. But most dinner scenes or even group scenes, not every single moment in the scene has equal weight. So if it's not clear to you, you can determine with the director what is the dramatic importance, what is most important to the director to get out of the scene, and you really hone in on matching those moments. If it's about a fight between two people, they got to stand up and fight at the same time, hopefully, or similar enough that we can get an edit in. So yeah, so when an actor is not matching enough, we do have to address it. Sometimes when people are very hardcore method actors, and listen, I'm a method actor too. I'm not the greatest with my continuity because it's not foremost on our mind. We're trying to be real, but he was so different from take to take that we literally had to design shots to cut around the discontinuity because he'd be doing some takes standing, some takes sitting, some takes with his jacket on, some takes with his jacket off. Can you imagine being the editor looking at that footage? Unless you had a super tight shot on, which we always did. So there was always that and cutaways. So there's a concept that I talk about in the program that my editing professor came up with. It's so funny. He said it like it was a thing with editors, but I've never seen it in an editing book. I'm going to put it in my book, by the way, which is not an editing book, but I do have to talk about the great Les Brown, who is no longer with us. But Les taught us about this concept called the buffalo shot. He used to edit Westerns in the 60s. And he would talk about having an escape route. If things were going south in the scene, like really crazy continuity, really axis crosses that didn't work, how can you distract the audience from that so that you can get them back into the scene? And he talked about in Westerns when there were screen direction issues where, the cavalry was charging in the wrong direction towards the other side, then how do you how do you fix that? Well, you cut to a neutral shot of the buffalo running over the hill. So that's the buffalo shot. So he would use that. He would encourage us in film school when we were shooting our scenes to always include a buffalo shot, something that will get you out of trouble. It could be an insert, it could be a reaction shot, it could be just something that you don't think is so integral to the scene, but it really is. Like an insert can tell a story. If you know the scene is about heartbreak and there's, I don't know, something shattered on the floor and you do it, it can reflect the theme of the scene. I mean, that sounds like heavy-handed, but yeah, it could be something as simple as that. But it's a buffalo shot. But you might see that directors solve an issue like, oh, we have a oneer, but it's way too long. Are we going to keep shooting till we get a shorter one? We could. Or we could shoot some sort of cutaway that gives you an out if you need to shorten the scene. What would that cutaway be? Right? Stuff like that we have to sort of start to see. There's so much more to visual storytelling to learn, but I really wanted those who are terrified of the idea that they have to edit in their heads to really start to see that. So solutions to combat like this fear and also to get stronger at this, of course, watch as many movies as you can, sit down with editors, try to cut stuff yourself, even if it's on your phone on the Instagram app. But there's free editing software, DaVinci Resolve, if you want to start to just shoot. We all have the technology now. That's what's great about the modern age. Try shooting things that are across the axis. And if you don't know what I mean by that, please take my class, or take a class where you learn about eye lines, because you are going to be expected to know that eventually. And listen, if you are not strong on visual storytelling and eye lines when you start your career, it's okay to say, I'm not strong on that yet, I'm still learning. But just give everyone the heads up so they know that, okay, well, our DOP is strong on that, or the director is strong on that. So we got you. And then just learn from them on as you go, right? Sometimes people ask me, how does it impact our work when there are multiple cameras? Well, it's the same. We're still looking, and this is actually hopefully will make you feel better about working with multiple cameras. If you're working, on that show with, we had 8 cameras in almost every scene, but he wanted me to work on set. He didn't want me to work at the director's monitor. He wanted me to be on set to call out lines. So, if you find yourself in that situation, well, with any multiple camera thing, it can be overwhelming. Which one do I look at, right? So there's 2 ways to sort of combat that. One is to sort of start to see the edit where you think the editor will cut and move your eyes around to the different, we'll start in the master, we'll go to that close up at this time. You can start to watch the scene that way, but that might be a bit advanced for brand new people. What I like to do, even now that I'm a super veteran or whatever, is I watch the actual scene. So I get to know what each of the shots are, so I can describe them in my notes and I can think about them and go, okay, this is what the coverage is. So when was like, Daniela, I need you on set, I'd say, okay, I'd watch the camera rehearsals if I could. Sometimes I couldn't, but when I could, and just see like what every camera was doing. And then I'd sort of get familiar with the mechanics of, because there's rehearsal time on set. Usually I'm typing notes when they're rehearsing, but sometimes I'm watching. Often I'm also watching like what each camera is doing. And then I'd go to set for the takes and watch the real scene unfold. Because no matter what the shots are, I mean, I got to know what the shots are too, but it's really about the physical action that's unfolding before my eyes. And when you watch it live instead of at the monitors, it becomes much more 3D to you and becomes easier to remember. It's just faster, I think. So my advice to you, if you're new, is to watch the full scene. Another way people do it if they can't be on set to watch a full scene and they're stuck at the monitors, is to watch the widest shot, because it gives you all the information. But of course, to know what the other cameras are doing. So the process of seeing the cutting points is the same whether you have multiple cameras or not. It's just in a way, multiple cameras makes your life a bit easier, because you know that there will always be something to cut to that's in continuity because it was shot at the same time, right? So that's like a good thing about working in multiple cameras, which we do more and more and more now. And then people say, well, what about visual effects? Because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen once they add the visual effects. How does that impact us being able to see the edit? We will, most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, when it's a VFX heavy show like Shazam, I did Suicide Squad, Shazam, Red Notice, all that stuff. I only did Action Unit for Red Notice and Suicide Squad, but I did the whole movie of Shazam, which was an endless VFX shot, by the way, is we get there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. There's a lot of storyboard. Almost everything is storyboarded. So you just have to make sure that the stuff on the storyboards has been covered. You're literally just checking them off. I mean, you still might get ideas in, once you're watching the action, or the director might still get ideas of what shots to need. There's not only storyboards, there's also previs. So they'll cut together animatics of how it's going to cut together in motion. So it really, really helps so much when you're doing VFX. So I don't want you to be scared of working on VFX shows. They're a delight. It's sometimes, and just as with anything else, communication solves so many things. Just ask the question. There will be a VFX supervisor on set. If you're unclear as to what's going to happen, like, because we have to write it in our notes, like, oh, the Eiffel Tower is being painted into the background. The editor won't know that unless they've talked to the VFX supervisor and director about it, but we can just write it in our notes. VFX will lay in the Eiffel Tower, which was a real note I had to give on Covert Affairs because we're always playing Toronto as a different city in the world. But literally just ask the question. If you can't see it, and the director's like, put a V on the slate, it's a VFX shot, and say, okay, can you just fill me in on what the visual effect is? And they'll explain it. I mean, most of them will. If they're not, I don't know. Like, it's in everybody's best interest to communicate, and we definitely have to know what's going on. I mean, there is so much to say on this topic, but I hope at least with these basic concepts that you'll have a good starting ground to start to tackle this, if this is a fear, if this is brand new to you. And also, by the way, I didn't say this part, you can start to attack this question in prep. So in prep, it's very, very important that we do a solid prep. This is a big fight right now in the indie world, where people don't know what we do in prep. By the way, on my YouTube channel, there is a video I do called What Script Supervisors Do in Prep, so that if you are faced with a production manager or producer who doesn't understand why you need more than 1 minute of prep, which is, I'm joking, but people are actually trying to give us 1 day of prep on a feature. Like, really? It's 10 days usually, but you can get away with 5 days. But anything less than 5 days is madness. Even 5 days is not, you're still doing some work for free at that point. But and I go through everything that we do in prep. In that video, you can show the producer that I've actually, it's just that they don't know what we do. But during that prep period, you can really start to troubleshoot, because you can start to, what I like to call, crawl around inside the director's brain and figure out the kind of movie they're going to make. And I personally do that by attending the tech survey. If there's any storyboards or shot lists, that I get them. I even go to concept meetings myself, like I do, and not a lot of script supervisors do, but I try to invite myself. I go to the read through. I mean, we should be at the read through anyway. I ask the director questions. I ask them logic questions. I ask them questions about their vision, not their vision for the movie. If there are any comparables, the visual style, all of that, so that I'm fully prepared. By the time we get to set, I'm not asking it what might be considered a stupid question, because I got the answer in prep. It just saves all that expensive time on set that needs to be, executing the best scene we can do on a technical and creative level. Anything that gets in the way of that will have been gone over in prep. So we anticipate things, right? We also meet with the editor in prep, and we ask them not only about our forms, but also about their preferences, like in terms of coverage. I've had meetings with editors where this is like the 5th movie they've cut for this director. So they're like, listen, this director tends to undercover. They don't give me enough overlapping action. Can you just make sure that they're on it and suggest that? Yes, like, that is so empowering and wonderful to have those conversations with the editor, because it's having, like, again, you're getting inside the director's brain a bit through the point of view of one of their creative collaborators. Paul's editor is incredible. He's my favorite editor in the business, but he no longer takes meetings with me or anybody. It's Brent White. But he has a whole team. So on A Simple Favor 2, instead of meeting with Brent like I did in the original Simple Favor, I just met, he's always cutting like 5 movies at the same time. So I met with his key, the editor in charge of that movie, and the assistants, and this was their first time working with Brent and with Paul. So I was more giving them information, but it was super cool. It was super great. Just establishing that open line of communication in prep will help you even on set. If there's a question, or it can go both ways. They might have a question for us. We might have a question for them. Just communication solves so much. It can save you thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions. I've seen communication save all of that. Yeah. Otherwise, there's big things that are answered in the program. I'm just going to quickly talk about Director Whisper for a second, and I'm going to get into the questions. There's a lot of misconceptions about my program, in the sense that people think it's only on certain times of year. It's fluid. It's on all the time. It's ever expanding and ever growing. And whenever you hop in, you get like access to all the future editions. It is a full and complete program that I've been using to train. I've been training people since 1995. I'm so proud right now. That program, I have some incredible students in 28 countries. We're at 535 students in 28 countries. So we have a killer community in there. If you're ever considering training with someone, and you can be brand new, that originally I designed it so that someone brand new could go through my program and start work on set, which that's what people do. That's what it's designed for. But more and more and more over the years, it got more advanced. I have a lot of really advanced stuff in there as well, because as I I've been doing it over 30 years. So I have so much to say about very specific things that I've added on to that. So I do have people. So now I say it's for the first 10 years, especially since I added a lot of that career strategy stuff. Anyway, if you're interested, I wanted to say that because people think that my program is only on at certain times of year. You can always jump into the program. It now comes with an intro call from me and an extra call when you get your certification. Okay. So, and to get your certification, you just have to do the basic training, which the basic part of the training is under 50 hours, which sounds like a lot, but we're putting a very complicated job from my brain into yours, and I don't hold back on anything. You have it for life. So when you do advance in your career, you can look back on stuff that are like, what did she say about this? Because now I find myself doing an action blockbuster. What did she say about action blockbuster? Because I see there's questions. So exciting. And so every week I do a Facebook Live with my students. I've been doing it since June of 2020 when we went online. The script supervisors do the full program. Directors do half the core of the program, which is called Am I Covered? The Art of Visual Storytelling for Film and TV. And there's script supervisors who are super veteran that sometimes just do that. They do Am I Covered? That program goes deep into axis coverage, eyeline, working with your cinematographer, working with your script supervisor, how to prep a television series, a little bit about script analysis, not enough though. I'm going to expand that. And I created this thing called the coverage planning worksheet and basically the only exercise in there right now, the only homework part of that part of the class is creating a shot list. Even if you are a script supervisor, you go through that in my program because it will help you troubleshoot the shot list for directors, right? A lot of people get a lot out of that homework. Olga, what does it help to match visualizing the edit with director's vision if you don't have a proper shooting list and storyboard? You will not have a proper shooting list and storyboard most of the time. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. Like I have worked with 200 directors now. I want to say 30% of the time I have that. So I hope that everything I've said, did I say anything about reading the shot list in this talk? I did not. I talked about watching the blocking and looking for the cutting points. That is, you do that if you have a storyboard and shot list, and even if you don't, because listen, even if you have a shot list and or a storyboard, um, they won't stick to it most of the time. As a lot of people say, they're not worth the paper they're printed. Now, that depends on the director. There are some directors who prepare fantastic shot lists and they stick to them, but you're going to run out of time at a certain point, a certain point of the day, and the director will say, I'm prioritizing. They'll hopefully turn to you and say, we're going to cut that shot if we lose time. Would the DOP go to you if you have to reshoot a scene and match the lighting? It sounds like so I highly recommend that you watch my 2-hour talk, The Role of the Script Supervisor in Modern Film and TV. It's free. It's just, you have to, if you go to my YouTube channel, it'll guide you to the page where you sign in and watch it. It'll answer a lot of what we do and what we don't do, what we're not supposed to be worried about. It's true, like in the modern age, they expect us to be like 5 different things that are, and yet they don't know the thing that we actually do. the actual, they being producers, other crew members, directors, even. It's very interesting. And it's partly, a lot of people did go to film school and they still don't know what we do. People in my program, some of them went to film school, some of them didn't, and they're like, we didn't learn any of this in film school. I'm like, I know, that's why the program exists. That's why I started teaching it when I did. So all those years ago. It's a learning curve. So when you're figuring it all out on your own like that, people are going to start to like say, this is your job and that is your job and this is how you do it and that is how you do it. Definitely train with one of either myself or Randy Feldman or Don Gilliam. We have like very, very, very detailed courses that are recognized in the industry that will help you cut years off that. So you won't be, it'll just help you cut years off that learning curve. Michelle, how important is it to match coverage scenes to the master? Oh, that's a great question. I don't personally see it as super important. This is a great question, but I've heard a few people here and there mention that they feel it's super important. How important it is it depends. Okay, so what it depends on is your director. So I've had directors and showrunners that I've worked for where it was super important that as much match to the master as possible, because like for example in Suits, they will use the master a lot. They like the wide shots in Suits, right? And for some directors, they are personally more concerned with continuity. Usually, I talk about this in the program. There's a hierarchy of what choices an editor makes, and continuity is like way down on the list, right? What's more important? What's most important is performance. That's why I say like we got to get familiar with what a good performance is. But number one on the list is performance, and a good performance trumps every other thing. So they'll use the take with a good performance, even if it didn't match continuity wise. But that doesn't mean we don't try to give the editor options along the way. It's ultimately what's going to happen. It's why you see so many discontinuities in so many big shows, and people may or may not notice them. But so how important it is depends on the director you're working with and or the showrunner you're working for, and how much the master will get used, because a lot of people don't use the master, very much at all. It's sort of a rehearsal on camera for a lot of people. So that's one of the things you want to get to know about the director you're working with or the show that you're working on. When you're the script supervisor on a series, you become the expert as to like what is important to the showrunner. But if the show is sort of discovering that, like on Suits, I did seasons 1 to 4. So we were discovering it through, I'd say, the first 6 episodes, what the look and the feel of the show is going to be. How much camera movement do we do? How many masters do we do? How much are we matching? How much are we respecting the axis? I think it becomes pretty consistent pretty quickly, but a lot of shows take time to find their legs. But these are conversations. So the answer is it depends. And it depends. And what you can do is like you can quickly say to the director, hey, in the master they did this, is that important? And they'll probably say no, but they might say, it's important, which way did he turn, because that's where I'm going to cut. Sometimes they'll say that. So it's just good to ask your director. But we need to know what the differences are in case the director springs one on us and says, hey, I really want to know that cutting point. What was it? Some shows have playback and you can play it back, but you're expected to know without playing back. I'm so old school. We didn't have monitors when I started, never mind playback. Listen, there are no stupid questions. Like they're really not, because we're all learning it and we're all at different stages. It's just some questions are so like on point with this topic. It's great. Is the transition from script supervision to directing still possible? Listen, it's the most common transition from below the line. So the most common transition I want to say is actor to director. DOP to director is still enough of a thing, but from crew positions, the number one most promoted job to director is script supervision. The very first talk on my channel, on my YouTube channel, is why script supervision is a path to directing. I talk about so many of my alumni who became directors, so many of my peers and friends who started out as script supervisors and became directors. Some of the best directors in the world for television, for sure. And it is a path in television more than anything else. Still a very modern notion. It didn't really start happening until like regularly until 10, 15 years ago. So, and it's still going like that. And that's why, I mean, that's not really why I started training script supervisors in visual storytelling. I think it informs, it helps us know what to prioritize. But the inadvertent effect of that is I have so many graduates who became directors, which is awesome. I'm a screenwriter, so I've never wanted to do that, but I love it. I love visual storytelling. Right now, I'm talking about regular television like Suits. So one of our big showrunners, like director showrunners, is Silver Tree. Tree. If any of you have gotten to work with Silver Tree, she's one of the best in the world. So she was a script supervisor for 12 years in LA. And then she got her first half hour through the Disney apprenticeship thing. And then she did her first 1 hour with me on Suits. And within 2 years, she was our showrunner, director showrunner. She went on to do 2 seasons of Shameless, 2 seasons of You, The Flight Attendant. Like she's off the charts, amazing. Silver's great. Yeah, like just the best, right? Just my favorite, one of my favorite humans. And the executive producers, one of the executive producers said to me, "We've hired one of your people." I was like, "One of my people, Italian Canadians?" And he's like, "No, script supervisors." I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess script supervisors are my people." I'm a nerd about visual storytelling. So I encourage you all to be nerds as well. And we can't know too much in our role. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Feel free to reach out with questions in email, and just know that my program is ongoing. It's fluid. The price will go up next year. Thanks, everyone. Bye.